Hi, everybody. I am really excited today because I have a super special guest. Last year, one of my teachers was at a doctor's appointment, and at this doctor's appointment, she said a strange woman came up and gave her a bunch of vegetables. And she told her she didn't need vegetables. And she said, everyone needs vegetables, take the vegetables. And so she did. And when she came back to work, she said, Annie, you've got to talk to this woman. She knows like everything about gardening. And I don't know about everything, but she really does know her stuff. And today she is going to be talking to us about composting. I am really happy to welcome Carla Toolan from the Farm to You program. So I'm really glad that you came to talk to me today because you are going to teach me all about composting.
Yes. Hello, everybody. Yeah. And I certainly don't know anything. I mean, everything about gardening, but you learn little tips and tricks along the way, and it's always just kind of adding to the arsenal. But composting, I think, is something that people are a little like intimidated by, and it's actually pretty simple. So I think, our goal today is to show you that it's something that you can do, and you can do it cheaply and easily, and it can be a part of your home gardening, school gardening, whatever you want to do.
Excellent. So first of all, my big question is why compost? What is compost?
Yes. So compost is kind of like nature's recycling process. So it's, so plants, just like humans, need nutritious soil. They need vitamins and minerals, essentially, and that all comes from the soil. And normally, when you think about, just the natural environment, there are leaves falling onto the soils. There's plants dying and decomposing, and there's, this whole decomposition process, and that takes all those dead plants essentially and breaks up all of their building blocks and their vitamins and minerals and brings them back into the soil. And so composting is basically us saying, hey, that's a really great process and we want healthy plants and growing gardens. And so we are going to create that environment and quicken it up a little bit, and then add all those nutrients. It's a natural fertilizer, so put all those nutrients in gardens so that they thrive and grow nutritious.
Awesome. So how are we going to do that?
So basically, you can gather all the scraps and waste and things you would otherwise toss in the trash, from your household, and create a compost bin and put them all in there. And then basically it's kind of like growing plants. So, you want to create an environment that has enough water, air, and nutrients for the composting process to thrive. And so we are gonna make a bin, a really fun composting bin. And there's a bunch of different ways that you can make composting bins, but the one that I'm excited about the most is made from a trash can, because especially kids love it because you can just batten it down and roll it around, and it's a really fun process for them, and it's very easy, it's clean, it's not super messy, so it's a really good way to get started.
Awesome. I am looking forward to that. I am really, really looking forward to that. I do have some questions about the stuff that goes in it, because when we originally started talking about gardening, I got really proactive and I was going to do my own composting bin. And then I realized I didn't really have an appropriate container. So I just started a pile, and I started taking all kinds of things out to the pile thinking I was doing myself favors. I was probably just feeding the skunks in my neighborhood. And so I know now, because I've talked to you a little bit about this, that there are some things you do not want to compost. So what kinds of things do not go into the composting pile?
Yes. So let's talk about the kitchen first, because there are a lot of things from your kitchen, food waste and scraps, that can go into your compost pile. So, and then there's a few things I'll follow up with. So in terms of things that are totally fair game, think about, if you're chopping up vegetables for dinner, all the bits that you don't want to eat can definitely go in your compost pile. So the nubs of your lettuce heads or your celery, your carrot tops, your potato skins, skins in general, if you're peeling anything. Now there's also like food that is spoiled in your fridge. It you can do that. You want to make sure that you're hands-on with your composting process if you're going to use like rotten, moldy food, because it needs to get it baby it a little bit more, because it needs to get a little warmer to be able to kill off those molds and stuff like that. But
Ah,
for the things that I wouldn't compost from your kitchen, animal products is one. They can be composted sometimes in big facilities where it's all protected. Pests aren't going to get in. It can get hot enough and kill off all those potential pathogens from, like, say, like meat that's at a regular, at an outside temperature. So like meat, eggs, cheese, oils and fats are also something that you generally want to avoid because they're going to attract pests. That's going to be the biggest issue. So basically, a good rule of thumb is kind of like cook food if you're cooking with oils and fats and cheeses and stuff. And then the one kind of fruit and vegetable item that I try to discourage people from is like citrus peels, because they're just acidic. They're pretty acidic, as you can imagine. And so worms and bacteria and stuff like that, they just don't love it. It's just not, it doesn't create that really nice environment for them to thrive, because what's happening is bacteria, fungi, worms, they're the decomposers. They're the ones that are taking all these raw materials and they're consuming it, and then what they produce is the fertilizer. So when you create a compost pile, you want it to be an ideal environment for those bacteria and fungi and worms and stuff.
okay, so this is actually a question for me. So one of the things that I did, I don't know why I did. I left some pumpkins out in my garden that I just let kind of rot. And when I was back there last time, I thought I need to move this because I was trying to sort of clear my garden area so that I can start thinking about planting again. And so I just sort of took them and I just chucked them on top of the compost pile. Do I need to move those? Do those need to go in the trash? Like, what do I do? It's done.
So you bring up another really good point. So one thing, so if you think about these tiny critters that are going to be doing this work for us, they are going to do it faster and better and more effectively the smaller the pieces of what you're putting in. So if you throw in a whole pumpkin, yeah, theoretically over time it would eventually break down, but it might take a couple years. Like, it might take a while, because it's not, I mean, the best the best would be if it were ground up. Like, if you were to put it through a wood chipper, then it would decompose a lot faster. So ideally, a good rule of thumb is something that's like about the size and thickness of your finger. Maybe not size of your finger, but like the thickness of your finger. That is going to give the bacteria enough chance to kind of get at it from all angles and decompose it.
Okay. All right. Yeah. I just wanted to check on that. And the other thing I had mentioned before was, for some reason, my family goes through a lot of pistachios, and we have a lot of nutshells at the house. And so we actually have this cup of nutshells on the counter at all times. So we're plentiful with the whole pistachio shells. Where do those go?
So yeah, so those will work too. And that'll bring us into our kind of browns and greens conversation. And just as like to answer your question directly, that things like nutshells, they're so hard. And this is kind of true with like peach pits or like fruit pits in general, avocado pits, stuff like that. The stuff that's really tough and hard, it is going to take a while to break down in that form. So the more you can break it, literally, you could drive over it with your car in a bag. Like you could, you can crush it any way you want to, and that could be a really fun activity for kids. But the more you can break it up, the faster it's going to break down. So that's and so zooming out a little bit, the browns and greens I was talking about. So there's really 4 big things that you have to think about with compost. 1 is air, 2 is water, and then 3 is carbon, and 4 is nitrogen. And so carbon is the brown and nitrogen is the green, basically. So nitrogen helps plants, like when you put this in your garden and it starts growing things. Nitrogen is the major nutrient for plants to help them grow lots of green foliage and stuff like that. It helps them to produce chlorophyll and all that good stuff. So that your main source of nitrogen is your kitchen waste, is the green think your fresh produce scraps, your fresh grass clippings is another good example. Plants that from your garden that have died, or like clippings from your yard that are still green and fresh. It was a live plant. There's a lot of there's a lot of nitrogen in that, because that's what the plant uses. The plant uses nitrogen to grow all that stuff. So that's your greens, your nitrogen. And then your browns, your carbon, think dead stuff. So when the plant dies and all the nitrogen leaches out of it, basically, you're left with with like all this dead matter, and that's leftover carbon. Carbon is kind of like plant skeletons, basically. And so that's your brown stuff. Also trees are a big carbon source. So paper, newspaper, wood chips, straw, dead leaves you can use as long as you have enough time for it to all break down. Ideally, using a little older leaves is better, because they're broken down and you can tell they're fully dead. Make sure they're brown. Make sure that they're crunchy. And so these are all things you can take from your yard. Little twigs, and like brushy, dead stuff. Now is a great time to collect browns, for sure. Everything is brown. So I will say the one little thing with browns is that if you can avoid paper and paper products that are bleached, that is good. You want to think brown paper or like newspaper, but ideally not bleached paper, because the bleach kind of doesn't create that environment that's so nice. And then yeah, that's really the main thing. And the more you can strip it up, again, the smaller pieces are better. So that's a fun activity for kids too, because they can just strip it up and rip it up and feed the compost pile that way.
Awesome. Okay, well, I think I have one more question, and then I know you have some stuff for show and tell. But worms. I know that you were talking about some of the insects that break things down, and yeah, I just love to hear more about it. I mean, that's another fun thing. Frankly, when I was a kid, I would actually collect worms. Like it would rain or whatever, and I'd be out in the driveway trying to stay around the road. I lived on a small street, trying to pull these worms off the pavement so they would get hit by cars. And could you stick those in the compost?
Yeah. So worms are an important player in the game. There's a bunch of all those little critters that you see going around the soil. Anyway, that's their ecosystem, right? And so there's a particular type of worm called a red wiggler. and it actually can eat like twice its body weight in a day or something like that. It's like it's like a compost machine, and so it's really really great for compost. The one thing I was reading up on it just before we got on, and the one thing that makes it a little tricky that I would say, don't always just dump worms in your compost pile, like those red wigglers, anyway, is that they can get really overheated or they can freeze. They're not great for any environment. So if you were going to do an inside composting setup, something in like, like say like a basement or like a sunroom area or something like that, that is a little bit more temperature protected, then doing a red wiggler setup is great for that. And they actually are really wonderful because they eat things so completely that it doesn't create odor. So it's if you want to do something indoors, then they are a great option. If you're going to do it outdoors, I mean, toss some worms in. Sure, the ones that you find outside that live outside anyway. They're going to help with the process. They'll probably find their way in anyway. So yeah, worms are an important part.
Awesome. Well, that is fabulous news. And I'm so glad that all these worms that I rescue when I'm out walking my dog will have a place to live now. So awesome. Now, you said you had some show and tell. So tell what you want to show.
Right. All right. Well, let me go outside right now. I'm gonna pull open my compost bin for you and show you what we've got cooking in there. We'll do a little addition so that you can see the process of what it's like to get some kitchen scraps added, and we'll show you what it's like to turn it too. So I'm gonna get my fiance Glenn to help me with it, and so. Let me just go round him up. One sec.
Perfect. All right. We'll see you outside.
All right. Homemade composting bin. So this is some straw. This is the browns that we'll use. And this right here is, so Glenn, my fiance, actually pressed some apples last night and made apple cider. So we've got some apple pulp that's going to be a really good like kitchen scrap, green. So this is the bin. So you can tell it lives out here, a little green on the top. We've got about 1/2-inch holes drilled every 4 or 5 inches or so all around the bin. So it takes a little while, but you only have to do it once. We also have it along the bottom, and we've got some little blocks just to keep it above ground so that the airflow can get underneath the bin too. And then we've just got a standard top here. If you want to take a look inside, you can see what we've got going on. So you can see I left it. You always leave your browns on top, so you kind of shield your kitchen scraps. So you always top it with browns. We can poke around a little bit in here. You can kind of see some stuff is still in process, our eggshells, but if you poke around, this is what finished compost looks like.
Oh, wow.
It really looks like dirt, and it looks like fresh, rich, sometimes they call it black gold. And so, that's what you're going for. That's what it's all going to break down to. And it's actually going to shrink to about the third of the size that it originally was. So that's what we're working with on the inside. And so I'm going to add some of our greens and browns. So the rule of thumb, there's a lot of different information you'll see, but anywhere from, you basically want like a 2-to-1 ratio, maybe even 4-to-1. You want more carbon than you want kitchen scraps or greens, more browns than greens. And so normally what I do is create a little sandwich layer. So I normally start off with an additional handful of straw. Straw is really nice because you don't really need to do anything with it. A bale will last you a long time. You don't need to rip it up. or anything like that. But you lay down your brown, and then I'm gonna take a little scoop of kitchen scraps. We'll just add a nice thin little layer. This is all nice because it's really uniform. Of course, when you've got your gross, you know, banana peels and stuff that you've been saving in your kitchen for a week, you're probably not going to want to touch it as much as I'm touching this right now. Don't need to. So it will, you know, nature is resilient. It'll do what it needs to do. But, you know, that's a nice layer. Now remember, you know, kitchen scraps are dense, and they're more dense than your carbon. So I'm going to put in a little more here. See, I'm not really sweating it about the ratio that much. This is going to be really nice. It's not something you have to take your calculator out for. But this is, you know, this is what we're looking for. So more or less in the summertime when things are hot and your bacteria are growing like gangbusters, you're going to turn your compost once a week. Ideally, if you don't, it's not the end of the world. The composting process will still happen. It'll just happen more slowly. And so this is just the way to get it happening the fastest. And in the winter time, things are moving slower. They're not growing as much. It's cold outside. Your compost is going to go slower unless you move it indoors. So you can turn it about once a month. Yeah, so that's basically the layering process that you want to go through. You don't need to be as hands-on as I am. But that's how we add things. So those are your browns, your greens, and then air and water are the other important parts. So water is mostly going to come from your kitchen scraps. They're pretty water dense most of the time. If it gets too wet, it gets really slimy and gross. And if it gets too dry, it won't compost very fast. Usually, rule of thumb is like a wrung out kitchen sponge. That's kind of the level of water you're looking for. So you can always add one of each, either one, to fix your water ratio, but that's what you're going for. You can also add water physically to it. And then air is the other one. And so this is the fun part, especially if you're a kid. So you just get your top on there really well. We've got 2 bungee cords here that we use for this. And so I just clip it under here. Oops, you know what? This is the long one, so I do it under the handle. There we go. And then this is our short one, so it goes just in a crisscross. Oh my goodness. Hang on. Not strong today. There we go. All right. So I think Glenn is going to help me kick this around because I hurt my back a little bit. So I'm going to take the camera and we're going to swap. You want to show him how we just kick it around the driveway? This is about as complicated as it gets, guys. Every once in a while, we'll tip it over so that it turns around the other way. But this is it, and so this brings enough air and movement around to all of the scraps in there, and it helps to feed the bacteria. You want bacteria that need oxygen, so you want it to have plenty of air in there. But that's it.
Okay. That is awesome. I have a couple of questions.
Yeah.
First of all, how long does it take to get from the apples and the straw to the dirt that we saw on the bottom?
Depends on how often you're turning it and what the season is. So
How long did that take?
that, ooh, well, I would say that you probably can turn it around in like 6 to 8 weeks.
Really?
Yeah,
Wow.
that's not 6 to 8 weeks, but I've left it for the winter a little bit, so it's that's not a good timeline to guess from. But if you're turning it, and if you make it into like a weekly process, and you mark your calendar and you check on it, then yeah, totally, you can get it turned around pretty quick.
Okay. Let's see. Other thing. Do we need to worry about once it becomes dirt? Is it going to come out of those holes when you're pushing it around?
So you don't need to worry about it coming out the holes because they're only a half inch. So, generally speaking, it's wet enough that it's not gonna just like completely, leak out.
All right. Well, do you have any other tips for us? That trash can, I was noticing, did you use that? Was that a new trash can that you bought for the purpose, or can you just use an old one?
Oh, you can definitely use an old one. The only thing is, and you don't need to do it exactly the way that I did it, but if you can just get the top fastened down so that it can roll around without spilling everywhere, then you're good to go.
All right. So any kind of work.
That's right. That's
Awesome.
yeah.
All right. Well, I'm going to try to make one of these things. So I'm going to take just a break.